So now let's look at it from their perspective, from Israel's perspective for a second. I hope we can all agree. Oh, one more thing before we transition from Jews to Israel. And that is, Jews do not equal Israel. There are Jewish Americans, and as you just heard Norman Finkelstein, he's Jewish American and doesn't agree with a damn thing that Israel does. And that's part of what, is the open-mindedness and the questioning, etc., of the culture that I love, right? And again, I feel bad saying the most obvious things in the world, but if you think that Israel is doing something wrong, you shouldn't blame Jews for it. Jews and Israel are not the same thing. Now, conversely, if you think that that Israel is doing something wrong, that doesn't mean you're blaming all Jews. Both things are true. Okay. For example, does Turkey do things that are wrong from time to time? Hell yeah. Now, if you point that out, that doesn't mean you hate all Turks. It means that you disagree with what the Turkish government is doing at that time. Should be obvious, but unfortunately these days it's not. So now let's move over to Israel. Look, I watched, one of our listeners sent a clip from David Horowitz Foundation or something that gave the whole history of the area from the Israeli perspective. And it was totally biased, and it had a couple of things that were just flat out wrong. But I watched the whole thing anyway. It took a while, and I watched it anyway, just because I wanted to understand their perspective. And one of the things that struck me in there is, look, when the Holocaust happened, and this is important for everybody to understand this, including the Palestinians, no one took them in. Do you get that? They're getting killed millions at a time. Okay? And no country took them in. So if you're a Jewish person in the world and you say, hey, look, I got to have a home, man. I got to have somewhere where when this stuff goes down, and it goes down every couple of 100 years. It happens over and over throughout history. It's the beast that keeps coming back. That anti-Semitism is an easy scapegoat that Jews have been throughout history. So I need a place I can call my own. I get that, man. Now, at the same time, I think they made a fundamental mistake. Because the tenet of Zionism, when it started, was take a people without a land and put them in a land without a people. So you can see what the obvious mistake is. They put them in a land with people. And that was the Palestinians. Now, from the Israeli perspective, they say, oh, come on, you have all this Arab land. And in reality, there was no, when all of this started, there was no Iraq, and there was no Lebanon, and Syria, and Jordan, and Israel, and Palestine. There was just the Ottoman Empire. And they're right about that. That is totally true. But that misses the point. Just because there wasn't a state called Palestine didn't mean that there weren't people living there. That got driven from their homes, that got driven from their land, or they stayed in their land and then it became occupied. So that's a fundamental injustice. And now I think people are beginning to recognize that. But at the same time, I understand why the Israelis are paranoid. Look at what's happened throughout history. Look at what happened during the Holocaust. And then a number of wars when Israel starts. Now, I get why the Arabs invaded. They think, what are you putting a... First of all, there's the nonsense religious side of it. You're putting a Jewish state in the middle of what they perceive to be Muslim area. Now, I don't agree with that philosophy because I don't care if it's Jewish or Muslim, right? But I understand that that would be their normal reaction if you know anything about history, right, or anything about the world. Plus, they're saying, look, these people lived here, and basically you're telling them now they're on Jewish land. So I get the first war, and they lost the war, right? And then the Arabs attacked again, and making Israel even more paranoid. And unfortunately, we've gotten that understandable concern about their safety, very, very understandable, has gotten to a point where I think Norman Finkelstein, who we just talked to, is right about their paranoia. I don't think he's right to the degree that he says it. He calls them lunatics, etc. I don't know that they're a lunatic state. I certainly wouldn't go that far. But they are a paranoid state for understandable reasons, but they've got to realize they're being paranoid because they're hurting themselves at this point. They got to get a peace deal so they can have some sort of peace of mind there. But they're making a peace deal at this point harder and harder. Why? JR and I were talking about this during the break, right? And I said, JR, remember what you and Wes have said in the past on the show. If somebody comes into my house, I'm not asking questions, I'm shooting first. Back in the day when we were having that conversation, Wes said that he'd take out a machete and swing away before he even knew what the hell was going on. He said, I got my family in the house. I'll ask questions after I swing the machete. Now, I disagree with that philosophy. I disagree with it inside JR and Wes's house. I disagree with it when Israel does it. So I said to JR, hey, can you see why, they'd swing the machete first? Because they're concerned about their safety and their family, right? But JR made a good point, which is, at this point, they're not coming to your house. You're going to their house. As Finkelstein said, you went to Lebanon, you went to Gaza, and I know you can have a discussion about who started but when you start going into other people's house because you think they might one day come to your house, and you start swinging machetes at their kids, then you're going to create more problems than you had. You're going to create more problems than you needed. And that's the situation that Israel finds itself in now. So I understand both perspectives, but at this point, Israel is a state. It's been there for over 60 years. You're not going to get those people out, nor should you. They're entrenched there. But the Palestinians obviously also need a state of their own. This is the most obvious thing in the world. And the more you swing the machetes, the further you get away from a doable peace deal. And I think the peace deal, the ironic part, I've said this before, I'll say it again, the ironic part is this about 85% done. Before, we weren't sure if the Israelis were going to give up the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Now we're pretty sure. They are. They will. If the situation is right, etc. I don't agree with Norman Finkelstein when he says they won't ever give it up. No way. They've got to. It doesn't make any sense, because if you have a one-state solution, there's only two possibilities. One is that the Arabs will outnumber the Jews in Israel, and it will no longer be a Jewish state. And that is 100% unacceptable to Israel. They will never do that. The other solution is that they permanently have an apartheid system where they occupy the West Bank and Gaza Strip. That is also untenable in the long run. It cannot happen. So they have to have a two-state solution. And I think they are 85% of the way there if they get back to the negotiating table. But the more you get into other people's houses and kill their kids, and that's frankly what's happening here. I mean, this Finkelstein's right about. You can't, dress it up and make it look pretty. You bomb a school and you kill 30, 40 people, most of which are children. Those people are going to hate you forever. They're not going to be in a mood to be a partner for peace. I know what it says in the Hamas Charter, and I understand that Israel's concerned about it, and they should be. I read the Hamas Charter, and I get concerned. They're fanatical Muslims, and they talk about eradicating and killing all the Jews, and that's the answer, that peace is not the answer. You read that, and that justifiably concerns you. But at the same time, they've said to Jimmy Carter, to other negotiators on 3 separate occasions that they are willing to take that out of the charter. You can make a deal. Just put down the machete and let's get toward a deal. So please, try to, if you're an Israeli or a Palestinian, for the love of God, one thing that's going to help you is if you look at it from the other side for just a second and see their other side's concerns, so that maybe you could address them a little bit, so that you could have that deal that we're all looking for, so that you could please, for the love of God, stop fighting, and we can get on with our lives.